18 different languages. So I've been deploying software for about the last 22 years. And I have several certifications, which I don't think I put on here. So basically, I want to talk about deploying Office, or I guess it's Microsoft 365 languages. So my agenda today is I'm going to go over the different deployment methods, quickly how you do this in Intune, because Intune's the fastest way to do it. Going over the Office deployment toolkit, without which we can't deploy Office. And then my 4 different methods I have for deploying Office within Configuration Manager, or the 4 methods I've, over the span of the last few years, we've used in my company. And then about refreshing the content, and if there's time and I don't overspeak, how to update Office with the ADRs and what the important settings on those are. So to deploy Office, there's 4 different options. A user can go to the Office portal and download Office and download their language packs, and they're good to go. That's obviously a personal selection, and it's not an enterprise solution. For small businesses, you can download the content with the Office Deployment Toolkit, put it on a file share, and have people run the setup from the file share. And if you have a small office without a management software, that's a perfectly acceptable solution. You can use Intune if you're not a Configuration Manager site, or if you're deploying applications through Intune, or you can use Configuration Manager. And I'm going to be speaking mostly about the Configuration Manager deployment. Deploying with Intune. Basically, you create an app in Intune. You use the configuration designer to select your options, or if you have a very complicated design that you want to import from a previous, you can use the XML editor. And the key thing with Intune is you don't need to specify languages. Intune is going to automatically deploy all the languages that you have installed on your operating system. So let me go over to demo that. So when I go into Intune, I'm going to hit my apps, all apps, and I'm going to add an app. And over here, there's a section for Office 365 suites. I'm going to pick Windows 10. And the first page is just your general information. I'm just going to click Next. And here's where you have your Configuration Designer. By default, I would go into Configuration Designer for our clients that we have co-managed, where applications are coming through co-management for autopilot. We use the Configuration Designer. If you want to and you have an advanced setup, you can also select the XML and enter your XML for the Office setup directly in here. Otherwise, you're going to go through the Configuration Designer. It gives you options, what products you're going to install.
I'm sorry, I think you're not sharing the right window right now. Just seeing the...
Okay.
Yeah, we're still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay.
I'm seeing everything.
Pointer, so probably sharing the wrong screen or something.
Okay, let me see what I did wrong.
Or if something else happened, everything just froze for me here for a couple of seconds. So
let me... I want to share. So I should say share desktop, right?
Yes.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Absolutely. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I'll go back here. So I'm in the Intune console. I'm going to go to Apps, All Apps. I'm going to add an app. And under the Office 365 option, I'm going to add a Windows 10 app. This first page is just general information. I'm just going to click Next to accept the defaults. And this is where we get into the Configuration Designer I was speaking about. So in the Configuration Designer, I have the options listed here on the page. I can select what version, what applications I'm going to install, if Visio or project needs to be installed, my architecture, my update channel. I'm not going to go through each one of these options. I basically want to show this is how you install the app and you can either use the configuration designer, or if you have a more complex setup, you can enter the information directly in the XML editor. Of course, that didn't work. So that's deploying with Intune. To deploy Office through a file share or configuration manager, and Intune uses this in the background. You use the Office deployment tool, which is designed by Microsoft. It's a command line tool that you use to be able to do the installation. Now, it's really important that you check back to the release history, because about 3 times a year, Microsoft will update the setup, and they add options, they add additional features that you can use in the XML file. They also make fixes, as everything, to update any issues that were found. So it's included. So you get the setup.exe file, which is what you use to do the deployment, and you get sample configuration files. The XML configuration files is where you put all your settings of what you want to install. So with the setup, there's 4 different parameters. Basically, the ones I'm going to focus on here today are the download and configure. The download option does what it says. You create a configuration XML to tell it what languages and what architecture you want to download and what program you want to download, and it downloads the source files. You use the configure switch to do the actual installation, or to add products, or to remove products, or to change options. Creating the XML file. As you saw with Intune, there's a configuration designer you can go through and create a configuration. There's one not just for Intune. When you use the configuration manager Office installer, they give you another configuration designer. And when you go to this website I have listed here, there's another configuration designer. So I'll demo that in a minute. You can manually complete the XML file, in which case you're going to want to go look at the documentation I had on the previous slide and see what the settings were. So now, can everyone see my screen?
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
So this website, config.office.com, allows you to do the configuration designer generically. So again, you'll see it's very similar to what we had in Intune. I pick my architecture. I'm going to do 34-bit, 32-bit, 34. That's interesting. I'm going to pick my Office suite. So I'm going to do Office Apps for Business. I'm not putting Visio or Project. I'm going to pick semi-annual targeted because we're brave. But unlike Intune, which is always modern, always the latest, with this configuration, you get to pick which version. So if you didn't want the latest version and you want one of the previous versions, you can pick what version you want to include. Again, we have our apps. And this is what gets interesting, is you're going to have your languages. So when I pick languages, I can set my primary language, which for my company, since I'm in the US, is English. But I can pick additional languages. So we support French, Norwegian, Spanish. I'll just pick those languages. And I click on Add. And if you look on the left-hand side, the dialog is showing me what features I have added. So I've added English, French, Norwegian, and Spanish. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of them. I'm just going to show from here, I can say export. I get my Office screen. I accept. And here is the XML file it created for me. It's telling me my channel is targeted and my Office version is 32-bit. The one thing to notice here, because it's different in the examples I'll be showing later, is it's actually identifying all of the languages. So if I use this XML file to install, it's going to install French, Norwegian, Spanish, and US, because all 4 languages are listed. Now there's a new option I'll talk to in a few minutes, which won't install all of them, but just installs the like Intune, just installs the options that are listed on your computer. The options, the languages. And that is the 4 major settings that are new within the last 2 years. Allow CDN fallback equals true. When you do CDN fallback equals true, it automatically downloads this language packs from the CDN. So if you don't have the content locally in your source folder, it will go to the CDN and do the download. Language ID equals match OS. That is the parameter that's going to tell Office to install Office in all the language packs for all the languages installed on the computer. So if I have French, German, and English, it's going to install Office in French, German, and English. The main thing you want to do is make sure you specify a fallback language, because there aren't language packs, Office language packs, for all the versions of the operating system language packs. So in case the language you want to use or the primary language on the computer is not a language that there's an Office language pack for, you want to do a fallback to your primary language. Now the language ID equals matched that's if you're doing a secondary install. So I've already installed Office 365. Now I want to install Visio or Project. By saying language ID equals matched installed, it's going to match all the languages that are already on my computer. Version equals match installed is going to do whatever version is on my computer. If I'm doing a secondary install, it's not going to download the newest version from the CDN. It's going to match the language I have installed. So I'm not updating everything. I'm just updating, putting the product on I need to put that I'm adding. To download, as I specified before, there's an XML file. So here's my XML file where I'm saying we want to download English, Spanish, French, and German this time. So I'm downloading the 64-bit and I'm downloading the targeted channel. So I would just open a command prompt or a PowerShell command and say setup/download and the name of the XML file, and it's going to create an Office folder with all the files that are needed to install Office in that folder. Configuration Manager 365 installer. Configuration Manager comes with an installation tool that you can use. If you look in Configuration Manager under Software 365 Client Management, you'll see the Office 365 installer. You can give it a name, give it a content location. And of course, I have to create the folder first. And from here is where we do the designer. So it opens up, it downloads that from the website, the most recent configuration designer, and then this should look familiar. It's what I just went through on the website. So I'm not going to go through the whole settings. But what you get when you're doing the Office 365 wizard is that it actually downloads, copies to a distribution point, creates the application object, and allows you to deploy it all through one wizard. Now, if I look at the XML file for that, for using the installation wizard, you'll see once again, it includes all the languages. So like the previous install when I did it through the web browser, it's going to install for English, French, German, and Spanish, whether I have those languages or not. By using the multiple deployment type, what we're going to do is use a parameter called the match OS. So that way we're not downloading all the language, well, we are downloading. We're not installing all of the languages. We're just going to be installing the language we need. So what I do with my multiple deployment types is I put all the files necessary for each language in their own subfolder. So each one is going to have a separate source on the application object. I'm also going to create a global condition that is going to give me return the UI culture that's on the computer. So that way I'm picking which deployment type based upon the language installed on the computer. And then my last deployment type is going to be for my primary language. So let me show you what this looks like. Can everyone see that okay? All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So here's my multiple language package. So for my deployment types, you'll see I have my 4. I have my Spanish, German, French, and US. So on my Spanish, you'll see my content is put in a folder for Spanish. So it's my Microsoft 64-bit Spanish. On my requirements, I have a global condition called UI environment, UI culture. And on this, I have my 3 different Spanish situations. I can have Spanish in Spain, I can have Spanish in Mexico, or I can have Spanish in the US. These are all valid culture codes in our company. I can also, for German, you'll see it's in a different subfolder for German. And my requirements are just that the UI culture equals German. Now, because with deployment types and configuration manager, only one condition should be true, I'm putting my last condition, which is going to be my default. So if it's not Spanish, it's not German, and it's not French, I want to install I want to install English. So I want to make sure that my default, if everything else fails, is my very last option. So again, it's in a different folder. And my requirements here are a little bit different. Instead of saying my UI culture is one of, I'm saying it's a none of. I want to make sure that my other deployment types worked correctly. They should have, but better to be safe than sorry. So I'm excluding if it's German, Spanish, or any of my previous conditions, I exclude them. So as long as the computer doesn't have any of those language for the UI culture, they're going to install English, which is my primary language. Now for this deployment, I had to manually create my XML file. So my XML file for each language has the match OS equals true, match installed, and I also included a parameter I didn't specify, is match previous MSI. So if you had the MSI version of a previous version of Office, it will automatically remove it and reinstall the same language packs that were installed from that MSI version. So those are the settings. So allow me to say, if I have Spanish as my primary language, it's going to default to the Spanish deployment type. But if the person happened to have Spanish and French installed on their computer, it would install the Spanish from my local source, and then it would download the French language pack from the CDN, because it's going to match all the languages that are on the operating system. And that's the multiple deployment. The global condition was just a 2-line PowerShell script, get UI culture.name, and then just writing the output, and that's the culture. The one got you on this is if you had English and Spanish installed on your computer, but your default language was set to English, you're not going to fall under the deployment type of Spanish because your UI culture didn't return that. But because we have allow CDN fallback enabled, it's going to download the Spanish version from the internet, and you'll get both US and Spanish installed on the computer. So these are just samples in case I couldn't zoom correctly of what were included on the requirements. So another option, which is kind of a compromise between downloading everything as we saw in the Office 365 installer and installing everything, and a compromise from having to create a deployment type for each. So like in my country, so my company, I have to deploy 17 different deployment types, one for each language. You can do just the primary language. So download everything for your primary language, use the match OS in the XML file, and it will fall back to the CDN for the rest of the content. So my primary language, content. So if you look under my Office folder, I only have content for English. And if you look at the size of the folder, come on, properties, so it's 2 gigs for just my Office folder, for just my English. Where when I did the download for all of them using the CDN tool for the 4 languages, I'm at 3.5 gig of data. So I'm using less content going down to the CCM cache. I have less content going to my distribution points, and then the user is able to download from the CDN any language packs that they need. I'm also have less overhead with configuring because I'm only doing one deployment type. I don't have multiple. So if I'm doing a large deployment and I wanted to get the majority of the files down to the computers quickly, and they can use branch cache or other peering solution for what's in the CCM cache folder, then this is a good alternative to having to download all the files. Now, if you're just doing a one-off deployment, and this is what we have in Software Center for users, say the service desk needed to uninstall Office because they're having problems, and now you want them to reinstall Office, instead of having to keep all my content up to date on the distribution point, because what I failed to mention previously is once I download this content, as soon as Office updates come out, the content's out of date. Instead of having to always refresh that data to try to make it as up to date as possible, I create an installation which is just the XML file and the setup. So no matter what, it's going to download all the files from the CDN. So that's going to look like this. I'm not putting any languages. I'm just telling it to match OS, match installed, and match my previous, like I showed previously. And it's going to download all the content from the CDN. So all I'm putting out at the distribution point or putting in the CCM cache folder on the client is the setup file and the configuration XML. And then the setup for the deployment is the same of the application. I had more slides than that. So why does content matter? So the content size of on the distribution point matters because as you increase more content size, you're going to have more stuff going down to the user's cache folder. So avoid that. And then the other problem with that is the content is out of date quickly. And why you don't want the content to be out of date is you want the content to be able to download and be close to the most recent version as possible. The Office uses binary delta differentials to download from one version to the next. So what happens is when you have an Office update, it's going to look at all the source files on the CDN, and it's going to look at the files that are on the computer, and any files that are different, it's going to download. So the more files that are different, the more files to be downloaded. So if I created my content in January and I'm not deploying this to a user until March, I then have 3 months worth of files to download. Where if I go from January to February, I don't have as many files to download. I just have to worry about the 1 month, and then it can use its delta formula to download the updates. So in order at our company to be able to have people to update the content on the distribution point, what we do is we use System Center Orchestra, and we have a 3-phased approach. The first is on the Friday following the second Tuesday of the month. We use that setup/download, and we download all the content. The next thing we do is we have a script that deletes all the content folders and then adds the new files to the folder. And then finally, we go out and we update it updates all the distribution points. So the script is like this. Here's a copy of the script. We specify the source with the prefixes for the language pack subdirectories. We have an array of all the directories, and then it copies the files it needs into each one. Now, the last point I wanted to make is how do I make sure when I'm doing my Windows updates that I'm updating for all the different languages? So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to create an automatic deployment rule like I would for any other update. The key thing when I'm picking my updates, I pick my date revised as the last month, and I make my description close to what the description is. So I'm only downloading one set of updates. The key here is on the language selections for Office 365 update. I'm going to tell it to download for each language that I have installed. So this way, it's not only installing the English version of downloading the English version of the updates, it's also downloading the updates in each of the languages that I have specified. And that's it. Sorry, I kind of stumbled there. Does anyone have any questions? Let's see if I can get back to